time on a video thinking I'm just going to talk about the dollar. I reached financial freedom by investing in buy and hold real estate. I have 16 rental properties that kick off a little over $17,000 a month in cash flow. So I retired last year from a job that I really liked because I like time freedom. And now I'm actually traveling. I'm in Portugal. I came here for, I was going to say a month or three to figure out if I like the area to invest in and maybe buy a home to come in the winter. But the people convinced me that I don't want to because everyone here is in a bad mood. So I'm not going to be investing in Portugal. But while I'm here, I see just as much news about the American dollar as I did when I was in the US. So I'm going to give a quick class on some ways the dollar can collapse. And what we hear about right now is the banking collapse. So the first thing that's happening is we had a couple of banks where people did what's basically called a run on the banks, so that the banks didn't have enough reserves to qualify for their license to remain a bank. And I'm going to kind of cheat and use a class that I learned from listening to or watching the books by Lee Child. He does a lot of research when he writes his books, and he wrote a book that was recently turned into a series on Jack Reacher, where there's been a couple of movies, but in this series, ironically, I took a trip with my brothers across the country and we drove around for a month. On that trip, me and one of my brothers listened to this Jack Reacher book. And the premise was the Colombian or cartels from another country were taking US currency, because one of the things that the US does that's pretty stupid is our currency, $100 bill and a $1 bill, are the same size. So the idea for this was, in the United States, they were buying a lot of $1 bills, taking them out of the country, bleach washing them, whitewashing them, whatever, and then printing them into the old style of the $100 bills. While I'm traveling in the UK, I was reminded of this because, as I see here, every bill is a different size. It literally scales from the largest bill being worth 100, a smaller bill being worth 50, 20, 10, down to the smallest bill being 5. So you can see the size difference. So that counterfeiting is a little bit more challenging. So in this book, Lee Child talked about one of the mistakes the US does with its currency is that you could turn ones into hundreds. That's not why our currency is failing. And it's not even failing because of the reason of the banks. In this book, Lee Childs talks about if the average American, so if every American that has a bank account went and withdrew $400 based on the math of banking in the US, that would cause a run on the banks and the banks would collapse, because we use what's called a fractured lending system. So every time you deposit money in the bank, they can lend out 90% of that, meaning they don't have to have your money in the bank to be a bank. They have to have 10% of deposited funds. And it's probably more convoluted than what I'm making it sound like. But what happened was these two banks, one was heavily involved with startup companies. And so when the tech industry started having problems and some tech companies that are in the startup industry pulled their money out, it caused a run on that bank. There was another bank that was heavily involved in crypto. So the banks that have failed aren't failing because there's been a run on our money. So that's not what I'm talking about when the dollar collapses. What I'm talking about is, could our currency lose value against other countries? So one of the things I've liked to do when I travel, in 2018, me and my brother David took a trip to Colombia, where the dollar strength is very significant. So the cost of living for somebody from the United States going to Colombia was extremely small. And then in 2019, we took a trip to Thailand, where the currency, something like 3,000 baht to the dollar or something ridiculous, like, a $20 meal in the US for the same equivalent amount in Thailand would be $2 or $3. So traveling to countries where the dollar is strong is a really good way for somebody reaching financial freedom to use geo arbitrage, where you travel where your dollar goes further. This is why we have a lot of countries where there are expats, people who reach retirement age, get on Social Security, and then move to an area where that's enough to actually live. Medellin in Colombia is a town that's mostly expats, or a large expat community lives there. So the strength of the dollar works for them. I'm traveling in Portugal, where the dollar and the euro are pretty close. I think it's 109%. It takes $1.09 to reach €1. So it's actually a little more expensive to spend US dollars in the UK because the dollar has a certain amount of value. And the way that our dollar has held value, the reason it might collapse, and the reason I want to point out the two things that I do as somebody who reached financial freedom and plans on never working again in my life to be secure in case the dollar collapses, because it's entirely possible. And there's a lot of people who talk about the dollar being backed by gold. And if you're on this channel, you're probably very familiar with Robert Kiyosaki, and he talks often in his book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, about how in 1971, the US dollar was taking off of the gold standard. So it's not been backed by gold basically in my entire life. So there was actually a few years in the 70s when they made it illegal to own gold because they were trying to provide strength to the dollar, because the only reason the dollar has value is because people think it has value. The US becomes involved in a lot of foreign affairs. For the US dollar to have value, we have this thing that people call the petrodollar, benzene dollar, where Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, some other countries, where if somebody wants to buy oil from those countries, one of the major oil producing countries, the requirement for several decades now has been that the country that wants to acquire the oil first must acquire US currency and then use that currency to purchase the oil. In exchange, we did things like, the reason I know this is I went to Desert Storm. When Iraq invaded Kuwait, did that impact the United States soil where our country is? No, but it impacted our dollar. So we sent the Marines and the military and to Saudi Arabia to stage for Desert Shield. We were there for months, and then we went into Kuwait for Desert Storm, basically expending our resources, our service members, and protecting the interests of those countries in exchange for them continuing to have people that want to buy oil use US currency so that our dollar has value when we travel. And in the US too, when it comes to exchanging goods and services with other countries. Recently, the BRICS countries, so I don't know the list of the countries, but there are countries like Brazil, China, and a couple of others that make the acronym BRICS, have been negotiating and trying to take it to where you don't have to use US currency to purchase oil in those countries. One of the things was, I believe it was Iraq and Iran having a treaty that was brokered by China in an attempt to have other countries take over the petrodollar. That could cause our dollar to crash. And then you add to it, since we had the thing that you can't mention on YouTube because your YouTube channel gets demonetized, a pandemic in the last 2 years, where we printed more money in 2 years than as a country we did in 2 centuries. We have more currency, so it should lose value based on inflation, meaning it takes more dollars to acquire things. Then you add, we might lose the petrodollar, and the dollar could crash. And here's why I'm not concerned. Not at all. I don't look forward to it. It'll cause a lot of pain and suffering in people's lives, but it won't really have an impact on someone who has planned for a recession, a pandemic, a prolonged government shutdown, or some reason why we could lose value in our dollar. The idea for me is, if you have to sell your life 1 hour at a time, if you have to earn money by working a job, the dollar is going to lose value and your wages are not going to go up fast enough to compensate. So rent is going to cost more, home purchases are going to cost more, fuel is going to cost more, food is going to cost more, and you're not going to be making more. So the people that I'm most concerned for are the people who have a W-2 job and sell their life 1 hour at a time. The first thing we can do to protect ourselves from the dollar losing value is, 1, acquire assets, where the value of the asset never really changes. What a house cost in 1920 and what a house cost in 2020 really wasn't that different. What happened is it takes more dollars to purchase it because of inflation. The power and the strength of the dollar is less over time. So it takes more to buy it. So we think it costs more to buy a house, but really what's happening is it just takes more dollars to buy the asset that's almost valued at the same amount. There are things when it comes to supply and demand and limited resources and municipalities that limit building that can increase demand in some areas. But there are still places like Gary, Indiana, where you can go and buy a house for $40,000, which isn't much different than 1970 when homes were being sold from Sears, like an Amazon catalog, for $20,000. Inflation has made it to where it just takes more money to buy these assets. So what you want to do is own the assets, because as the dollar loses value and you need those dollars, these assets are worth more because it takes more to get them. That's the first step. So that's one of the reasons why I'm confident as we're facing a collapse of the dollar, which I don't see happening, but since it's all over the interwebs, I'm talking about it and explaining the idea that a run on the banks could happen, but a run on your properties is not going to happen. And I saw the Uneducated Economist talking the other day, and I actually reached out to him to maybe have a conversation just off camera. I'm not trying to promote my channel by reaching out to him. I want to actually help him. He talked about interest rates going up, and now investors and home buyers are losing their properties because interest rates went up and their payments are going to go up. Less than 11% of current mortgages on residential property are adjustable rate mortgages, which also take a couple of years to kick in if the rate does change. So if you're talking about commercial, sure, rates adjust. But if you're talking about 30 or 40-year fixed rate debt, raising interest rates don't impact investors. So I'm hoping to have that conversation and explain to him the difference in what he was talking about with commercial versus residential, and why I primarily focus on residential real estate, because of that fixed rate debt, which is the second thing that we can do to really hedge our bets against the dollar losing value. You can short the dollar with debt. The example is, if I sell you, or if I give you a cell phone, and I say, this cell phone is worth $1,000. I want you to hold it for 1 year, and then in a year, sell it back to me. And if you don't, you'll owe me $1,000. Well, that person can sell the cell phone currently for $1,000, and in a year, that cell phone will be worth less. They can buy one for less, give it to me, and keep the difference, because they lose value over time. The dollar is losing value over time. You can take out fixed rate debt on an asset that doesn't change value. It just takes more money to buy it, which means it's appreciating in value, which is actually just the dollar losing value. That debt becomes easier to pay in the future because of inflation. And if you add the dollar might collapse. Imagine if somebody had to be paid a wheelbarrow full of money, to use Matt the Lumberjack landlord's language from the other day. But if they had to receive a wheelbarrow full of money in order to justify working for a week of their life, that wheelbarrow would pay off all of my mortgages, because when the dollar loses value, the debt that I owe the banks becomes easier to pay off. So if you own an asset that doesn't change value and you owe debt on that asset, I don't want to see it happening, but the dollar collapsing is a phenomenally positive experience for people who have buy and hold investments. And if it collapses completely and we go to crypto to be the new currency that people are using, well, then your rents become crypto. The coin of the land pays for the housing. So is the dollar collapsing? I don't think so. And a case in point for this is, before we were the world reserve currency, the British pound was the world reserve currency. And they lost that, 60 something years ago. And for most of my life, the pound has still been worth, even though it's not the world reserve currency, it was still worth more than the US dollar. I think in the last year was the first time I saw those two flip. So for 60 years, even if we lose status as the world reserve currency, that doesn't mean the value of the dollar drops, like the Zimbabwe experience that they had with hyperinflation that happened with their currency. So I'm not concerned about it. But just like I can use the example that since we've started tracking the data, rents have never once gone down. Not once over a 5-year period. There was one time in 2009 when Class A rentals dipped enough to make it look like rents came down. But in Class B and C rentals, where we invest, or where I recommend investing, rents have never gone down in a 5-year period. Not market wide. They have in local areas like Detroit, when the car manufacturers move away, or Silicon Valley when the dot-com crash hits locally there. But market wide rents have never done that. But I still invest planning on a 50% rent reduction. I plan on rents going down 50% and still not having to go back to work by not over leveraging and keeping my portfolio ready to handle that by diversifying the locations and diversifying the tenant types. I'm prepared for those kind of things. So to prepare for something like the dollar crash, I've invested in assets that gain value when the dollar loses value. And I've invested on those assets with debt that gets easier to pay the more inflation we have and the more the dollar loses value. Again, I don't hope for either, but I'll benefit from both. So I'm also doing this live stream. That was the intro. I'm starting to release the intro, 10 to 15 minutes of a live stream. I'm going to do it on the weekends. So you're going to start seeing, like today, a video from a year ago where I didn't have a beard. And I got all these messages. Oh, you shaved your beard. Cool. So apparently people don't like the beard. I think the beard should go. But so you're going to start seeing those. And those intros are here. So what I'd like to do now is for the next 30 to 40 minutes, I'm going to answer questions. I know it's a Saturday. I know some people are off doing things, but I want to answer questions for people who can't make it to the Tuesday live streams at noon today, which is 8 o'clock my time. I have to be out of here within the next 40 minutes because my course has a Zoom call going on for at least an hour, which will come up then. So my alarm should go off at some point and I'll be taking off. But until then, I would like to answer questions that you have. Can be about the dollar. That's not really my true area of expertise. I have researched it enough to know that my strategy is hedged against problems with it. But generally, my questions that I'd like to answer are about reaching financial independence, investing in real estate, how to get your tenants to ask you to raise the rent, which is actually a strategy I have that you can get in a free course at diontalk.com/binder, and any other questions that you have. I can give terrible relationship advice and terrible parenting advice. So howdy, everybody. Dividend Dave is the first. Julie Anderson, Oscar, howdy. Julie, real estate is very comforting. It's still there when everything around it collapses. Totally agree. It is real, it's tangible. And even if it ever does burn down, that's why we have insurance. Justin, howdy. Have you ever done any rehabs or just bought outright? I have not purchased all cash yet. I did make a mistake and pay one property off. In around 2014-15, there was a time where you were only allowed to have 4 mortgages in your name. I got to 4, figured I'd pay one off and then add to 4 and pay one off. They've upped that limit to 10. So I started going towards 10 mortgages. I have not done any of my own rehabs, but I've done rehabs with several people. My brother has 10 paid off rentals and each one was basically a rehab. I have a friend who purchased a duplex a little over a year ago now. We did a rehab for one side of her unit, one unit on the side of her duplex. But I prefer to buy rent ready or already occupied properties and then have the tenant ask me to raise the rents. It takes the least amount of work. I don't have to spend the money on the rehab. Gets me the yield that I'm looking for. I probably could make more money if I kicked the tenant out and did a rehab or hunted for vacant properties that somebody had already kicked the tenant out with. But I was working full time when I started investing and I wanted to do the simplest format. I call myself the lazy investor. That's why I have the course, How to Reach Financial Freedom for the Lazy Person, meaning busy. I was raising 3 kids as a single parent, trying to have a life, wasn't trying to invest to create a job. And a rehab to me, even managing one, is kind of a job. So I've done minor things like had a roof replaced after I purchased a property. I put in flooring and painted a couple, but I've never done cabinets. I've never done countertops. So not yet. And as far as have you ever bought outright? Generally, when you're in growth phase, when you're growing your real estate portfolio, you have to know what your goals are. If your goal is like Zuber or the Lumberjack Landlord or Millennial Mike, where you want a large number of properties, you don't want to buy outright. You want leverage. You will scale faster with leverage. You will scale faster if you do HELOCs, cash out refinances, take out a second mortgage, sell for a 1031 exchange, redeploy the capital, you'll grow faster. So buying all cash would be kind of a mistake if you're trying to scale. I've only purchased with mortgages, so I haven't purchased outright. But, and I want to be careful saying this because I don't want you to compare year 12 to year 10 or year 1. I might purchase my next property cash. because I'm not trying to scale anymore. I think 16 is more units than I want, but the money's building up. And having come over here to Portugal and realizing that I don't want to invest here because of the people, I'm probably going to buy a property cash in the US, which will get me the worst yield, highest cash flow for the purchase, worst yield. And then use that cash flow to pay for all the Airbnbs that I use when I do travel. And as soon as I get back, I'm taking a trip with a friend, and then me and my brother are going to Thailand after that. And then I've got the cruise in September. And then when I get back, I'm going to figure out where I want to go for the winter and not be in Washington. And the cash flow from that purchase is what I'm mentally going to use, even though there's already enough cash flow to cover it. I'm justifying all of the travel expenses with that next rental purchase. Kind of like I have a vehicle duplex that kicks off right now a little over $2,000 a month for my next vehicle, which I will not spend that much, but that's what it's producing. Healthcare duplex, food duplex. I'm going to buy the travel properties, whatever $500,000 gets me. Thank you, Justin, for that. That's a great question. Beard looks darker. It does. When you travel, you should bring your gray dye. Just no for you. Aaron, howdy. Chester, howdy. Hopefully, Chester, I will see you in the course Zoom here in 40 minutes. If you're available, that would be awesome. A little more personal to interact on Zoom. Fractional reserve lending system. Yeah, it works great on paper and it works great for a period of time. But if enough fear happens in the people that are using that fractional reserve, not the lenders, but the people who are putting the money in there to be lent out, happens, a run of the banks is entirely possible. Daughtry is back on. I need my hat. Where's my hat? All that means is that a bank has to reserve a fraction of its deposits. Bank can lend out later comes the concept of interest spreads. Yeah. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. I knew there was an S, that's why I didn't remember. Kip, howdy. You have a good friend in Portugal looking for a home. So what I learned about Portugal was there's Porto up north, which is the biggest city area. Then there's Lisbon, which is the capital. I might end up going to there next week because I'm still here for a couple more weeks. And I'm down in the Algarve. Like there's the central, which is mostly farmland type stuff, but down in the Algarve is supposedly the best weather. Beautiful cliffs, great kayaking, scuba diving. There's probably good snorkeling too. We haven't done that. A lot of hiking. My brother actually used the quote that I took him to boot camp without all of the yelling because we've been doing so much hiking. And then actually, while I was narrating one rental at a time for this last 2 days, he's gone on like 6-mile hikes each day, come back, he's going to be red when we get home. So Portugal's beautiful. But Kip, make sure your friend understands that there is a cultural difference here that I was unaware of for the first 2 weeks here. And I literally just thought I found the rudest, meanest, saddest people on the planet. So I was almost ready to go home until Scott sent me that article that I referenced during my live stream with the Lumberjack and Millennial Mike yesterday. There's actually a term that exists in Portugal that doesn't really translate into other languages. We can translate it into a bunch of words, but there's not a word that means this thing. And it's saudade. And I probably said it wrong, but it basically means they enjoy being sad or longing for something else, right? So everyone here looks like they're in a bad mood. Their faces are always, I'm going to use a language, so hopefully there's no kids watching. Their faces look pissed off all the time. I watched over 100 people interact walking along the beach and through the town and along the cliffs. I saw 2 humans acknowledge each other's existence in any way out of 100 plus people. So if you don't know that when you get there, it's off-putting. But once you find out and you look around and you're like, okay, so this culture has a joy of sorrow is the closest translation that they've tried to explain to me in English. Now that I've asked, like, what's this mean? And it's kind of like the Tim Curry in Legend says, you can't enjoy the light without the dark. You can't have joy unless you experience sad. So if your friend is here and they run into somebody and they say, how are you? In the US, we will flat out lie. No matter what's going on, I'm good, right? You could be coming from a funeral and you can just, I'm good. But here, they'll say the best answer generally is, I'm doing so-so. That's the response. And if they're in a sad mood and your friend tried to cheer them up, that's rude. because that person's sadness needs to be experienced so they can experience the joy. And right out of the article, I like the thing that Scott sent me. It said, this ain't Thailand. Damn, if they're not right, because that's where I'm going next. So the main reason I'm not buying here. Laura, howdy. Chester, yep, that's the biggest problem. Unless other countries have a need for use for value for US dollars, the dollar could crash along with inflation from excessive dollar printing. This is correct. Asset values largely remain unchanged. That's the thing that it's hard to explain to somebody. They'll go, but I saw an ad on Facebook where you can buy a house for $17,099 or whatever, and they build it right at your place. And now they're $500,000. Well, based on the strength of the dollar at the time, it's about the same. Aloha, Mark. Any cats needed saving out of palm trees today? Chester, one of the things I wanted to mention was inflation fallout could hit hard quickly, like hyperinflation, like the Weimar Republic in Germany. So there's a clear incentive to maintain dollar hegemony. Screw. And again, have assets and don't over leverage because the dollar might not collapse, but have leverage because the leverage gets easy. It's the reason why the federal government, the Fed, targets an interest rate of an inflation rate of 2 to 3%. Because the federal government is in $30 trillion worth of debt. And if the dollar loses 2 to 3% of its value, that 30 trillion is easier to pay off. We never will, because overspending is the problem, not printing or taxing. Chester, you're going to be there hopefully. Pound sterling is 25% stronger than the dollar. The exchange rate is currently 1 to 80. Yep. I'm going to preemptively a little bit nervous to show what my rent box looks like. Nice. Let's hopefully see that in the course tonight. He's in Lisbon. Lisbon is, I haven't been there yet. I think we're going there, I think, after next week. That is where our rich journey lives, the couple that retired on stocks and moved to Portugal. And had none of their videos have they ever explained to me that I heard that Portuguese people are always in a bad mood. Would have been nice to know. The banks make money by loaning our deposits and borrowers at a higher interest rate than what they can borrow from the Fed at the prime rate. Interest spread in a nutshell. Plus, they lend it out more than once. So, if there are any other questions, I will definitely cover those. It can be about Portugal. It can be about investing, financial freedom. I kind of wanted to do this so that if there's anybody here who's in the class, you should be getting an email, you should be getting a message in the Mighty Networks where the course is on the course members live stream tonight, that the Zoom link is in. I'll put it in the chat here too in a little bit. I want to sum up with, I don't think the dollar's collapsing. And even if we do lose that world reserve currency, I still don't see the dollar collapsing after that. But inflation is going to be a thing. While Michael Zuber calls for property values to remain flat for the next year, maybe plus or minus a few percent, which we've seen both in the last couple of months, Matt, the lumberjack landlord, calls for a drop of about 10% in property values. And he explains it where the median price will come down because the luxury high end is not seeing a lot of deals. So that price is going to start to see the biggest hit, which will have the biggest impact on the median. But in the area where I invest, and I suggest investing in that almost move up buyer just after first time buyer kind of duplex area in a Class C neighborhood, those prices can go up and the median can come down. So I think Matt's right. I think prices are going to go up because of inflation. Us printing more currency in 2 years than 200 is going to make it take more dollars to buy the properties. I don't see any inventory coming on. There's not enough new builds going on. There's not enough forced sellers for prices to remain flat or drop with that amount of inflation. So I hope Zuber's right. I think me and Matt will both be right. Median price will go down because luxury came down. So Matt will be right. The price point where I invest and where I suggest investing will go up, which sucks when you're buying. It's great when you own. And Chester, yes, every time you hit the like button, an angel gets its wings. Laura, howdy. A concerned family member called me to advise me to sell my house because the price of houses are collapsing. Nice. I believe everyone should sell their houses and tell me that, their best price when they start crashing, that we should buy them. Your concerned family member, let's say they're right, Laura. Let's say home prices crash by 20%. You still don't sell because you bought that for cash flow and the rents don't come down. When home prices fall, it will be because there's no buyers. No buyers mean more renters. More renters means higher demand on rentals, which means increased rents. So you're not in the convincing business, just like me and Matt aren't. We're not in the convincing business. People who want to understand real estate and reach financial freedom with it, great. People who want to argue and say stocks is better, that's a viable path. People do it all the time. It takes longer, it's slower, it takes more money invested, but it's an option. Andy, howdy. How would you recommend to handle the utility bill in a single family home house hacked? Great question. So I kind of do that now, but I travel so much. The utilities are their problem. Let me see. You're house hacking a single family home. So guessing renting out rooms, because if you have a subdivided area, you could separately meter depending on your city. It might be harder. You can put in it's not an exterior meter, it's a different one. Generally with utilities, now Todd Baldwin does rent by the room and he includes the utilities, but he gets a premium on each room, like $1,000 a room on a 5-bedroom house. It's $5,000 a month coming in. So bake the utilities into the rent. It's probably the easiest, but the reason I don't do that, so it's viable. It works for Todd. He makes way more money than I do. So he knows what he's doing, right? So I can't critique him. I don't want the emotional feeling of somebody with the window open and the heater on spending my money. But if you can bake it into the rent where you have a good enough variance of the things that you can't monitor, that's probably what I would do. There are some tenants that I have where the separately metered for electric. We don't have natural gas there in most of the places in Washington. I think I have one that has that. But the others, the water has to be in the property owner's name. So I pay the utility bill for water, and then I bill the tenants a flat rate, which basically evens out because it's a little more than most months, but in the 1 month in the summer when it spikes because they use more water, that balances out the little bit that I'm more throughout the rest of the year. You have to know your local laws, though. It's not this way in our area, but in some areas you are not allowed to charge more than what the tenant pays. So that only works if you can know how much they're paying. But for me, if it was by the room, I would make sure that there was enough of a variance because of the added income from the rooms to just have the utilities included. If a tenant wants faster internet than what's there, I would explain, well, here's the cost of that. If you want to, you can. If there's something else that could be extra that somebody wants, then it would be on them too. Yep, Chester, I agree that selling is the worst thing. And Laura does too. That's why she made the comment. She knows that would be the worst thing to sell. Andy, I'd be living in the basement and renting the top unit, which is a 3-bed, 2 full bathrooms. Nice. So sounds optimum. I would bake into the rent the cost of utilities. Now, it doesn't have to cover the whole thing because you're also living there too, but enough of it. And if you're living there, at least for the time being, while you're living there, you can kind of monitor, are the windows open? Is the heater or air conditioning on and the windows are open? That's really the concern, is that they're overusing something. Yeah. Ophir, howdy. Hope you're doing well in Portugal. It's okay. Yeah, it's interesting. Laura, it's so many people believe the Crash Bros. There are people who watch these channels who also watch the Crash Bro channels because I get it, it's entertaining. And literally for over a decade, there has been a reason every year for the crash to be right around the corner. So why wouldn't people think that it's true? It's a new, different reason every single time. And every time there's a kernel of something that creates an emotional response where most people can say, oh, I can see that happening. That seems totally logical. Not realizing, and here's the reason why I've never really tried to debate the Crash Bros. First, I just say, okay, if you've been calling for it for 10 years and it hasn't happened, that doesn't make you a genius when it finally does happen and you've called for it for 13 years or however long it takes. But the crash doesn't matter. Like, if I knew property values were going to be 20% less in 6 months, I'd still be trying to buy today. I'd find the great deal that hits the yield that I want to. I'd put my money to work. I'd benefit from principal pay down, tax benefits, and cash flow between now and then. I wouldn't wait, even if I had the crystal ball that worked and I knew property values were going to drop 20%. I'd still be hunting in 6 months too, and I'd find a better deal then. And Laura, it's not worth explaining. I mean, you can, if you try to save a family or friend with that, that conversation. But I have a friend who was a mortgage underwriter from 2003 to 2006, like made hundreds of thousands of dollars every year, probably selling the loan product that caused a lot of the problems. He's absolutely convinced that you can't buy a cash flowing rental. He's been that way for like 5 years now. He's been telling me I'm waiting for the crash. Every time I'm buying a rental, he says, I'm just going to wait for a crash. There's no way you can do it. And I've been doing it while we were talking. So I don't talk to him about real estate ever, because we're not in the convincing business. We are in the helping business. Somebody who's opened their eyes and said, this is the path that is working for you. How did you do it? What can I take from that and use in my journey? That's who I'm looking for. And so I'm not saying ignore your family member. You might have been able to make an impact and bring them around. But if they want to believe the crash bros, maybe just point out that the crash bros have to take down their videos after 6 months because everything that they called for hasn't happened. The only one I've seen that hasn't done that is Ken McElroy, because he's not a crash bro. But in 2020, he made a call for a 40% property drop within 6 months because of the thing that happened in March of 2020. Can't mention without being demonetized. He went back and said, yep, I was wrong. Awesome. And I watch all his content. I really love the dynamic between him and his wife now, Danielle, because he's got syndications, massive portfolio, years and decades of experience in that kind of realm that I don't invest in or care about. But Danielle has 3 rentals and is starting, and she's still looking at, what is every expense? How do I manage the tenants? How do all of those things that matter to an investor? So I kind of like the blended conversation that you get. But most of the other crash bros who don't own rentals or are giving advice on buying rentals and want to attack the people who own rentals, who are retired or traveling the world doing whatever we want to do, we must be wrong. And we don't even care about the crash because it doesn't impact us. It actually, rents went up in Class C and B in 9, 10, and 11. Buy and hold investors prospered because of that crash, which is one of the reasons why I don't invest in Class A rentals. I could buy one, but I wouldn't want it to be my whole portfolio or a large percentage of my portfolio. Once I have these 16, maybe 1 or 2 in a higher class, sure, I'm not looking for them. My search doesn't include it. But so I'm not saying investing in them is bad. I'm saying it's not the strategy that works for me. Oh, fear. A follow-up on the last question. I just purchased a single-family house with an ADU. They are still vacant. I put down that the single-family house will have a flat rate for the utility costs and the ADU as well, but he will pay a smaller amount. Nice. So that works. I mean, because you can kind of go on the size of the buildings. If possible, if you have a house in an actual ADU, try to separate meter them and put as many of the utilities in the tenant's name as possible, not because it increases your profit. Like, that's always a good thing, right? But the main reason is it takes away that thought of, is the tenant spending money that they don't care about because it's yours? Chester, halfway reasonable rationale keeps people in suspense or something that might even be incredulous. That's why crash bros won't ever go away. They won't know. And the train wreck sells. And I'll be honest, they're good at their trade. Right? I'm not very good at YouTube. I am not teaching people how to make a YouTube channel. I don't teach people how to get their credit scores up because mine is only around an 800. If I had an 850, maybe an 845, I'd probably have a channel on how to do your credit score. I just know how to get it good enough to get a good rate on my loans, which now means if I buy a property with a mortgage, if Biden's plan goes through, I'm going to pay an extra % on my mortgage so that anybody with a bad credit score can get a 1.5% off of their payment, which seems totally fair. prefer talking about my exes to talking to Andy. Oh, another question. When you market the single family house you'd house hack, how would you recommend to specify this in the copy of the listing? Don't take this wrong because it's going to sound deceptive. Don't. Maybe call it a duplex, something like that. The idea is to get eyes on your property. So I looked at somebody's listing pretty recently, and they showed the exterior, which wasn't too attractive. And then they had this really nice kitchen, and they had washer dryer hookups, but they didn't even have a picture. And so when you're going through the process of listing your property, what's the most attractive feature? Is it the kitchen? Is it the backyard? Is it the pool? Is it the whatever? Have that be the first image. And if you have washer dryer hookups, have an image of a washer and dryer, because some people don't read the text. They just look through and they go, oh, that has the kitchen we're looking for, that has the whatever. Other times, if your exterior looks great, it's like, this is right out of the book, One Rental at a Time, which I'm almost done narrating, literally got like 10 pages left. So it'll be done tonight. And Mike can start uploading that and get a new version of the One Rental at a Time book out to replace the automated voice, the voice that they used the first time. He said, if you buy a property and it's going to be a reno, like you're going to do a burr or something like that, fix the outside first. The free advertising of repairs and maintenance that are going on in a visible part of your property can draw in the tenants who are going to think, come by and say, is this place going to be for rent? So free advertising by fixing the outside first. Same concept when it comes to your listing. It is not your job to point out square footage, negatives like somebody lives in the basement. What else? What else matters to owners? Year it was built. Tenants don't care. Year it was built, square footage, those kind of things. Use the images that show the most important aspects of your rental. When you get to the communication point where you're having a conversation with the person, you can say, this is a house. I live in a separate apartment, and the entire area, the 3-bedroom, 2-bath, is the part that you would be renting. That's where people can make the decision if they want to go into it or not. So I wouldn't point that out in the listing. I'm trying to think if I've done that. So I've put in duplex in one and a couple. Matt the Lumberjack Landlord had me take that out and put, this is the place you're looking for as the title of the rental, because I was still thinking, what do I want to see? How many bedrooms? How much parking? You know, all those kind of, that's not what a renter wants. The renter is looking at advertisements for your rental. You need to advertise the rental. Howdy Ninja, JR, All-Nighter Hider, good afternoon. Is it afternoon there? Where you are? Oh, you're a little bit further east now, so it is. Ophir, how would you recommend doing separate meter then? Seems like it costs around $5,000 for water and electricity separation. I would separate the electricity, probably not the water. For me, because water usage stays kind of consistent, except for maybe 1 month in the summer, but electric can spike throughout the year. You want that as much as possible in the tenant's name. That is, to me, that would be worth the $5,000 for just the electric to put it in their name. But yeah, get permitted, do it legally. Just the electric without the water probably won't cost you that much. Get a couple quotes, use the Thumbtack app. I actually have, I'm making a video on my most recent experience with the Thumbtack app, because this is a way that you can find a handyman. I had, what was it? So here's the Cliff Notes version of the video that is not scripted and not in order yet. So this is not going to sound as good as it will in the video. I had a garage door motor go out, and I have a handyman that went, got a garage door, took it there. Wasn't his skill set to put it in. So I went on Thumbtack and I advertised, I need a garage door motor installed, because this duplex has a new garage door on this side. It's an old one, but it's in really good shape, so I don't need to replace it. I just need the motor replaced. I got quotes from Thumbtack within like 10 minutes, 4 or 5 quotes from $200 to $275 to install the motor, make sure everything works right, inspect it, and all that kind of stuff. And so I had this guy go do it. The experience between the contractor that I hired, and if you are in Pierce County, Washington, I recommend, if I can find his name, let me just actually open the Thumbtack app, because it was a great experience. So worked around my schedule, best price, quality work, guarantees it. Interaction with the tenant actually reached out and said, oh, this guy's great. It was projects. finished. Garage door repair was done by Top One Garage Doors. So Top Gun Garage Doors, and I think his name is Benjamin. So I'll be able to find his information because I'm actually going to put it out in the video. When I have a good experience, I want to make sure that I share that. So Benjamin from Top One Garage Doors. And I'm going to put his info here because I want people to reach out to him. During our conversation, so he does garage door repair, but he has several different listings on Thumbtack because of all the things that he can do. So what I'm doing now is I'm developing a relationship with a third handyman because I have one that's really good work, but inconsistent. If he's watching, sorry, you are. It's hard to get all of you sometimes. I have one who went back to CDL driving, so he's not really available. He'll do some things on weekends, sometimes great work also. And I want to have more handyman because as a property owner who self-manages, that travels a lot, the most important person on your team is your handyman. And so Benjamin from Top One Garage Doors, his phone number is 323-741-9373, Pierce County, Washington. I will put that in, I will pin a comment below after this video. And I'm going to be making a video specifically about this guy because that's two handymen that I've developed relationships with now where I get an estimate on doing something from the Thumbtack app. But then once you interact with them and you see the quality of their work, find out the scope of what they can do. I have this one handyman that can do pretty much everything. I know that he doesn't do carpet. And now I know he doesn't do garage door work because the springs or some aspect of it that's beyond what he normally does. So I reach out on Thumbtack. I got quotes from people who can do this. So now I have several contacts of people who I know are in the garage door world. Once I had the work done, I had an actual conversation with Ben going, what else can you do? And then I looked through all of the reviews on everything that he's done to see what thing is in kind of his wheelhouse. And now I have somebody else that I can call while I'm in Portugal, when I come back and take my trip, when I go to Thailand for a month or 3, and then when I get back and I go on the cruise to the Mediterranean, like the rest of my year is kind of booked with. The ability to do this is solely because Ben, Jeremy, David, my handyman that I can call and say, hey, I know it's 2 o'clock. Normally it's an emergency when I text at 2 o'clock in the morning and they'll go. But this morning I just forgot that I'm 8 hours ahead of home and texted at 10 in the morning, figured he'd be awake, and he was at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I start to understand why sometimes he's not available because it's 2 o'clock in the morning and he answered his phone, which means, yeah. So hopefully Ben gets some contact from people. I will pin that phone number in the comments after this. Really good work, super happy tenant, and good price. What else can you ask for? Licensed, insured, all that stuff. Tech savvy because he's on Thumbtack. Lots of reviews on there that had good things to say. I made sure to do reviews too. So that is how you can develop relationships with handymen from using the Thumbtack app. Andy, I kind of imagined you were going to give me the answer in the exact same way you gave it. In my case, the basement and the top unit both have their own kitchen and laundry. Perfect. Yeah, that's exactly why. You don't really need to clarify. You do want to clarify during conversations, right? Up front, but not, it's like resume theory. If you talk to HR people, they're going to tell you to do the dumbest things, like put your work chronology on there. Talk about your experiences, talk about your accomplishments, and none of that is seen by the AI that's going to look at your resume. It's literally a blank spot. There's a video on my channel called Why Your Resume Sucks. And if you want to know why your resume sucks, it's all in there. I ran a nonprofit and we worked with over 2,000 CDL students a year for job placement. And I learned the thing that irritates everybody who works in HR because it will get you to the interview. No kittens to save today, mopping floors right now. Oh, that sounds awesome. But mopping floors in Hawaii sounds better than some places we could be. Laura, one of my duplex's units came with a raining shower head. I told the handyman to replace because I hate it. He forgot it was rented to someone who fell in love with the raining shower head. Nice. There is one in the Airbnb that I'm at, which there's my alarm. So I have to be wrapping up here in a few minutes to get to the live Zoom call for the course members. If you have been to DionTalk.com and signed up for the course, this is a live Zoom we're going to be on. So I'm hoping if there's anybody here, you should be going into Mighty Networks and finding the Zoom link. I'll be there in just a minute. Ophir, I use Thumbtack app like you recommended. I found a lawn care service that seems good and more affordable than what my PM offers. Also going to switch to Hemlane for the property like we talked about. Awesome. Let me know how that goes. I'm happy with them too. I am not a Thumbtack affiliate. There's no link or a discount or whatever. I just love using their product. It's great. I should figure out if they have an affiliate where I can get you guys something since I recommend it so much. Oculus. Do you play VR? How do you handle lawn maintenance in buildings with more than one unit? I prefer tenant is responsible for, of course, but don't want issues over who does what. So I literally in their lease have a little hand drawn. This is your section of the lawn. Almost all my properties have their own fenced areas that they handle. I've got one duplex that doesn't have any fences. So they just kind of an imaginary line between them where they handle it. My fourplex, since there are no clearly delineated areas, I actually have a guy that does the lawn care service there. So that's how I handle that. I put it in the leases, tenant's responsibility. That could be kind of unique to your area. There might be some places where it's not normal for the tenants to take care of the lawn. I don't know where that is, but all of my units are in a place where it is normal for the tenants to take care of the lawn. Oculus, hey friend. So I added it to the utility costs since they do the art I'm paying for the lawn care. There you go. Nice. So in some way, no matter what, the tenants are paying for expenses. That's just how it works. They can either do it, or if you do it, it would be a cost that they have to cover. And I'm probably going to be wrapping up there. Thank you all for hanging out on a Saturday. We'll be back for my normal Tuesday 4 p.m. live stream, which will be midnight here, which is fun. And hopefully I'll see you at least in the chat tomorrow for Matt the Lumberjack Landlord's live stream, and that starts at 8:30 a.m. Pacific. Thank you all. Until my next video, thanks for coming to my Dion Talk.